In the summer of 1955, the major powers convened in Geneva. The Russian delegation was led by Marshal Bulganin and Nikita Khrushchev. Eisenhower's most striking proposal was open skies. Ike claimed his plan would ease mutual suspicion, but it would also prise open the secrecy of the Soviet military machine.
Open skies involve both the freedom to overfly each other and observe, photograph and observe what was happening, and second, an exchange of blueprints, as Eisenhower termed it, of the military programs on both sides. We broke up for tea shortly after that, and as we were standing there, Khrushchev came walking up to Eisenhower, sidling up in his way of walking, and said, "Niet, niet, niet, you're simply trying to look into our bedrooms." And as we were riding back, Eisenhower said, "Now we know who's in charge of the Soviet delegation."
Later that year at the Moscow Air Show, the Soviets allowed the West to see their new jet bombers, codenamed Bison. Significantly, overhead flew 10 long-range Tu-95s, capable of delivering a nuclear bomb all the way to America.
Для американцев появление до десятка.
For the Americans, seeing 10 planes capable of reaching the United States was a shock.
На территории Соединенных Штатов Америки, естественно, было шоком. До этого считалось, что
At that time,
баллистических ракет еще не было.
in the absence of ballistic missiles, they supposed that the Soviet Union didn't have any means of delivery to America.
США Советский Союз не имеет.
In response to fears of a bomber gap, Ike doubled the rate of B-52 bomber production. America needed to find out how much of a gap there really was. In California, the Raps were coming off a secret photographic reconnaissance plane. It was designed to fly at 70,000 feet, out of range of fighter planes and anti-aircraft missiles. The U-2. Controlled by the CIA, these long flights across Soviet territory posed obvious risks, but the information they might bring would be vital. Ike took the gamble.
Khrushchev, around that period, came to the conclusion that missiles were the weapons of the future, and that warships were getting obsolete, bombers were getting obsolete, that we should concentrate everything on missiles, and as he said somewhere, that we are on the point of producing missiles like sausages.
Engineers from all over the Soviet Union had been arriving in the harsh Kazakhstan desert to build the top-secret rocket base of Baikonur. On the 15th of May 1957, they began testing the world's first intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM.
We were kept in such strict secrecy that we couldn't mention the word missile even between ourselves. It was called the mechanism, the product. We called it our dear one. That romanticism, it helped us to live, to keep going.
Building missiles was just one step. The next would surprise the whole world. October the 4th, 1957, Russia launched the world's first space satellite. They called it Sputnik, traveling companion to the Earth. Americans took for granted that theirs was the richest and most technically advanced nation in the world. With Sputnik now orbiting the Earth, all that changed. Russia had won the opening event of the space race. To catch up with the Russians, America pushed its own satellite project forward.
The Army and the Air Force were very eager to put up a satellite. Eisenhower was dubious about their proposals and decided to call on the Navy to produce a new satellite called the Vanguard to carry this out for peaceful civilian purposes only.
And so at the sunrise hour of the launching day, the U.S. scientists realize the world is watching and waiting. Success or failure will bring equal headlines. That is one price of greatness. And the Americans who sweat this one out at Cape Canaveral know their fledgling is on the spot. After rising but a few feet, the three-stage 72-foot rocket loses its thrust. The remarkable slow-motion films tell the rest of the story.
It was a national humiliation. The world's press had a field day. Something had to be done in a hurry to restore confidence in American technology. To the rescue came a former German rocket scientist, Wernher von Braun. His team had been working on a military missile known as the Redstone. Hurriedly, the Explorer satellite was fitted to it. It worked. The race in space was between capitalism and communism, a competition the West feared Russia was winning. Russia was bursting with pride and celebrated its new scientific heroes. In 1959, Vice President Richard Nixon opened the American National Exhibition in Moscow. He tried to impress Khrushchev with America's advances in color television.
There are some instances where you may be ahead of us. For example, in the development of the thrust of your rockets for the investigation of outer space. There may be some instances, for example, color television, where we're ahead of you. But in order for both of us to benefit, you see, you never concede anything. Wait till you see the picture.
Khrushchev toured the United States, the first communist leader to be invited. In Hollywood, the stars turned out to entertain him. In the streets, people gave him a frostier welcome. The last few days of the visit he spent with Eisenhower at Camp David. Both said they were ready to slow down the arms race. It was difficult for Eisenhower to argue for restraint. The American people were convinced that the missile gap favored Russia. Ike was questioning how much of a gap there really was. U-2 spy planes had been searching for missiles. Few had been found.
We needed the information the U-2 was bringing back because the Russians were so secretive, the largest country in the world with no tourists, no nothing. I mean, we needed some special means for finding out.
Pilot Gary Powers was selected for one of the longest and most dangerous spy missions ever flown. He would take off from Pakistan and fly north right across Russia. His route would take him over new and improved Soviet anti-aircraft defenses. As soon as the U-2 entered Soviet territory, Russian radar tracked its progress. MiG fighters were launched but couldn't climb high enough. The order was given to fire new S-75 missiles.
Одной ракеты было вполне достаточно.
One missile was enough to shoot down the Powers plane.
Ну, прежде всего, мы увидели...
What we discovered first of all were the remains of the plane. And here they are behind me. The fuselage, wings, and fuel tanks.
Eisenhower was told the plane was missing and that a public statement might be needed.
I reminded him that we had a cover story that we would use, that the plane was a high-altitude weather plane, and it must have been off course and so on. And so that was put out.
It is entirely possible that having a failure in the oxygen equipment, which could result in the pilot losing consciousness, the plane continued on automatic pilot for a considerable distance and accidentally violated Soviet airspace.
Там же, естественно, и самое главное,
And the main piece of evidence, so to speak,
сам Пауэрс и его снаряжение.
Powers himself and his equipment.
Были и такие вещи, как
He had with him a poisoned pin and a silenced pistol.
Вот смотрите, вот аэродромы, вот наши сидят.
Khrushchev sprang the trap, and having us in it, said we not only have the plane, we have the pilot, and it wasn't a plane that was off course. It was on course. It was not a high-altitude weather plane. It was a spy plane, and we know all of that, and demanded an apology from the United States.
It appears that endeavoring to obtain information now concealed behind the Iron Curtain, a flight over Soviet territory was probably undertaken by an unarmed civilian U-2 plane.
Khrushchev gathered us around him, and he said, look, we're going to take a very tough position because otherwise our public simply will not understand. We'll have to make a statement saying that the president should apologize, should punish those responsible for those flights, and should say that they will not be repeated any longer.
2 weeks after the shoot-down at the long-awaited Paris summit, Khrushchev, furious that Eisenhower wouldn't apologize, stormed out. The summit collapsed. In Moscow, Powers' trial for spying was a major media event. The world saw America caught in the act.
I ask the court to weigh all the evidence and take into consideration not only the fact that I committed the crime, but also the circumstances which led me to do so.
Powers got 10 years imprisonment.